Hello and welcome to the third and final episode of Tagore Einstein Conversation. My name is Shaunak and I welcome you to this program. Now, in the last two episodes, what we have seen particularly is the background when Einstein and Tagore met, the time when Tagore went to Kaput at the outskirts of Berlin and met Einstein, and then the further conversations which took place, particularly in terms of philosophy, subsuming the entire world in terms of humanity, whereas Einstein's opinion was to be truth independent of humanity. We also have observed what is the Pythagorean argument of truth and how Einstein and Tagore talked regarding the truth, which individual perspective and they believed. Now, in the second episode, we have seen that Einstein was telling that the problems begin where the truth is independent of our consciousness. And what Einstein, Tagore told that what we call truth lies in the rational harmony between the subjective and objective aspects of reality, both of which belongs to the superpersonal man. Now, this is actually where we ended. Now, in this regard, I have explained what is subjective and objective reality of truth. So the objective truth, what we perceive, and the subjective truth that we opine through our opinions should be in harmony with each other. So the subjective truth, what we see, is always subject to certain conditions, opinions, taboos, etc. But objective truth is actually what we see. Okay, this is the objective truth, right? So what Tagore is telling, that the rational harmony between the subjective and the objective aspects of reality. Well, what Tagore is trying to tell is that even if we want to reach the universal mind or the universal man, the subjective reality, which is even subject to certain boundaries, etc., and the objective reality, which is actually the objective reality which we perceive through our senses, what we see, should be in harmony. And then only we can reach the superpersonal man, and both of which belongs to the super universal mind. Now, before we start today's episode, I have actually made a note of something very important. Now, this book on the nature of reality, which is written by Partho Ghosh, and there an author, his name is Shitanshu Shekhar Chakravarti, is basically a scholar of comparative literature. In this book, makes a very important point in the chapter which is entitled as Tagore-Wittgenstein Interface: The Poet's Activism and Virtue Ethics. Now, in this particular chapter, Professor Shitanshu Shekhar actually makes a note. Here, harmony is not just balance or equilibrium. So we are talking of the harmony which Tagore is telling. So he's telling here, harmony is not just a balance or equilibrium like harmony in music. It is creative in its aesthetic mode, present in the ethical dimension, and is pleasing overall. Certainly not binding or depriving either to oneself or the other. Thus, harmony is not simply self-control that Aristotle talks about as a measure against self-indulgence or intemperance, but adds meaning to the onward flow of life. Harmony, in this second sense, is a virtue which we prefer to designate as a harmony within. It is the Tagorean sense of harmony, which is an aesthetic concept that binds all his involvements together in a broader aesthetic mode, where ethics find its place. Here, he may not toe Wittgenstein's saying, ethics and aesthetics are one and the same. To Tagore, Professor Chakravarti continues, to Tagore, in the aesthetic mode is the basic virtue for us humans. It goes deeper than empathy, which by itself may not be enough in a situation for justified moral acts to follow. For the latter have to be backed by proper understanding of the relevant situation and the required expertise relating to relating to it on which a right act can stand. The virtue harmony within encompasses empathy and incorporates within itself the dimension of right understanding and the needed expertise. Harmony allows us both to honor as well as promote a value. Now, you see what the professor rightly has told, that it is not the harmony of music, it is something in its aesthetic mode present an ethical dimension. And note what he says at the last, which is important. To Tagore, harmony in the aesthetic mode is the basic virtue for us to humans. That means the harmony that he is telling, that it should be universal man, the objective and subjective reality. Until that, we cannot perceive the truth, or we cannot reach the universal mind. So he is telling that the harmony is a basic virtue for us to humans. The virtue that is what we call is the guna. In Sanskrit, virtue is called gun or guna. The virtue harmony within encompasses empathy and incorporates within itself the dimension of right understanding and the need to expertise. That means it is a virtue which encompasses empathy within human beings, and it incorporates within itself the dimension of right understanding. Harmony allows us both to honor as well as promote. Harmony, which Tagore is talking about, helps us to make an honor as well as promote a value. It is an ethical sense. It is a virtue of human being which helps us to reach at the universal mind. So this is something very important in this chapter, Tagore Wittgenstein interface. It's just not a balance or equilibrium. It is certainly not depriving. It is a harmony. It is not. He even disagrees to Aristotle, saying in the Tagorean sense of harmony, which is an aesthetic concept that binds all his involvements together. So we start now with the last episode, and we start from what Einstein has told. So Einstein, even in our everyday life, we feel compelled to ascribe a reality independent of man to the object we use. We do this to connect the experiences of our senses in a reasonable way. For instance, if nobody is in the house, yet that table remains where it is. This is a very famous example. This is very famous, I think, in one of the films of Partho Ghosh, the famous Bengali film, cited this. So Tagore says that, for instance, if nobody is in the house, yet the table remains where it is. Einstein. So Tagore says, yes, it remains outside the individual mind, but not the universal mind. I repeat these lines. Yes, it remains outside the individual mind, but not the universal mind. The table which I perceive is perceptible by the same kind of consciousness which I possess. Einstein, our natural point of view in regard to the existence of truth apart from humanity cannot be explained or proved, but it is a belief which nobody can lack, no primitive beings even. We attribute to truth a superhuman objectivity. It is indispensable for us. This reality, which is independent of our existence and our experience and our mind, though we cannot say what it means. Tagore, science has proved that the table as a solid object is an appearance, and therefore that which the human mind perceives as a table would not exist if that mind were not. At the same time, it must be admitted that the fact that the ultimate physical reality is nothing but a multitude of separate revolving centers of electric force also belongs to the human mind. In the apprehension of truth, there is an eternal conflict between the universal mind and the same mind confined in the individual. The perpetual process of reconciliation is being carried in our science, philosophy, in our ethics. In case if there be any truth absolutely unrelated to humanity, then for us it is absolutely non-existent. Particularly in here is that we will take a pause right now and just go forward to understand. Now Einstein actually says that if the table is in the house, he says, and if nobody is in the house, just we told this earlier to this discussion, is that if somebody is there and we shut our eyes and we shut down ourselves, yet the truth remains, right? So he says, for instance, nobody is in the house, yet that table remains. So in the beginning, what Einstein tells, that even in our everyday life, we feel compelled to ascribe reality independent of man. So Einstein continues what he believes, that reality is independent of man. For example, that nobody is in the house, yet the table is where it is, right? Tagore says, yes, it remains outside the individual mind. Obviously, if I am not there, it is outside the individual mind, but not in the universal mind. It is outside the individual mind, but not the universal mind. The table which I perceive is perceptible by the same kind of consciousness which I possess. So, what is important, what Tagore says, that even the individual mind, okay, it is not there, the table is not there, right? But in the universal mind, it is always there. So now what is most important, that he says, apart from humanity, the existence of truth cannot be explained or proved, right? Einstein says. Now, you see, in this part of our discussion, Einstein says our natural point of view in regard to truth, in regard to the existence of truth apart from humanity, cannot be explained or proved. Now, you see that we will come to the final conclusion when Einstein will tell that, you see, to Tagore, that in that case, I am more religious than you. Now, what Einstein is telling at this point, that suppose that there is a truth which is independent of humanity, even that truth cannot be, but a belief which nobody can lack, even in the primitive beings. We attribute truth. Now, Einstein says that we attribute truth, what we believe is truth, a superhuman objectivity. It is indispensable for us, the reality which is independent to our existence, though we cannot say what it means. That means Einstein believes even if there is a truth which is independent of human being and nobody can deny to us, even the primitive beings, we cannot say what it actually means. So Einstein believes that even there is a truth which is independent of humanity, we cannot see. Now notice that what Tagore says. Tagore says science has proved that the table or any matter is an appearance, and therefore that which the human mind perceives as a table would not exist if that mind were not. This is great. So whatever you perceive, this telephone, this sky around us, this wonderful morning, any material object. So Tagore says that therefore if the human mind was not there, how can you call an object as an object? It is the human mind which is making the sense that this is square, this is round, this is blue, this is white, this is red, this is green. So he says that the solid object is an appearance. It is just an appearance, right? And therefore that which the human mind perceives as a table would not exist if the mind were not. It's not there, how can you say that the table is a table? Now he comes at a wonderful point. He says that the perpetual process of reconciliation is being carried out in science, philosophy, and ethics. And if there be any truth absolutely unrelated to humanity, for us it is absolutely non-existing. So the truth is non-existing if there is any truth which is unrelated to humanity. Now you see this the most important line is the perpetual process of reconciliation. So do you remember that song which we discussed in the second episode, Shimar Maje Oshim Tumi Bajao Apon Shur. That means within the limit you are unlimited or infinite. So the limitation, the problems that we cannot understand the universal mind or the infinite human being is within us. And you have seen in the second episode where Tagore says that science goes through a process of eliminating those individual limits and finally reaching the universal mind. So this entire perpetual process of being and becoming, rising and falling, the morning and evening, the tide and the web, the death and the birth, everything is going on, and it is the process of reconciliation. What reconciliation? Process of reconciliation to reach to the universal mind, to understand the universal mind. In this regard, I will also like to take a note of the famous physicist Erwin Schrödinger. I think we all know he is famous for his Schrödinger's wave equation. Now, in this famous book, this is the book which is called What is Life? In this famous book, Erwin Schrödinger, now note, being a scientist, right? He's an European, he's a German. So what he says, consciousness is never experienced in the plural, only in the singular. Even in the pathological cases of split consciousness or double personality, the two persons alternate, they are never manifest simultaneously. In a dream, we do perform several characters at the same time, but not indiscriminately. We are one of them. In him we act and speak directly, while we often eagerly await answers or response of another person, unaware of the fact that it is we who control his movements and his speech just as much as our own. How does the idea of plurality arise at all? Consciousness finds itself intimately connected with and dependent on the physical state of a limited region of matter, the body. So Schrödinger, in this book, if you have read, it's a wonderful philosophical book, What is Life? He writes that consciousness is never experienced in plural. It is in the singular. Even in case of split personality, which we have seen in pathological cases, there also the manifestation is only from one. So he says that they never manifest simultaneously. In a dream where we perform that we really do control the speech, etc., while we often eagerly await for the answer of another person, unaware of the fact that it is we who control his movements and his speech. That means it is we are controlling that person's speech, even in dream. That is, it is coming from only one. So whether be it consciousness, whether be it split personality, Schrödinger tells that consciousness doesn't arise from plurality, it arises from singularity. And later in this book, this is wonderful what Schrödinger tells. What seems to be a plurality is merely a series of different aspects of this one thing produced by deception, the Indian Maya. So he says that plurality is merely a series of different aspects of this one thing produced by deception. You remember that Tagore telling that what we see in the individual mind, it is Maya or illusion, and it is a deception. So this is very important of Schrödinger's note in this book, What is Life, that it arises out of one, and what it seems is just a deception. Okay, let us go forward and understand the final concluding lines. Now, Tagore continues, it is not difficult to imagine a mind to which the sequence of things happen not in space but only in time, like the sequence of notes in music. For such a mind, such conception of reality is akin to the musical reality in which Pythagorean geometry can have no meaning. There is the reality of paper, infinitely different from the reality of literature. This is important. There is the reality of paper, infinitely different from the reality of literature. For the kind of mind possessed by the truth which eats that paper, literature, is absolutely non-existent. Yet for man's mind, literature has a greater value of truth than the paper itself. In a similar manner, if there be some truth that has no sensuous or rational relation to the human mind, it will ever remain nothing so long as we remain human beings. This is important. If there may be some truth that has no sensuous or rational relation to the human mind, it will ever remain as nothing so long as we remain human beings. Now, what Tagore is trying to tell is that there might be a truth which remains only in time, not in space, and he gives an analogy of a musical instrument, because in musical instrument you see that the piano or the sitar, in typical Indian cases, it plays, and it plays with time. So he says that in that case, the Pythagorean geometry cannot have any meaning. Why? Because Pythagoreans, we have seen earlier, believes that number exists independent of reality, right? So you see what he says, that it is not valid although the mind counted it only in times of rhythm, that is time, not in space. So what he tells, this is important, that suppose there is a paper and there's a moth, and the moth eats out that paper. So the literature, but the literature in human mind is more important than the paper. So here, as the moth eats the paper which contains the literature vanishes, right? Because the moth has eaten up the paper, whatever poems, etc., were written, it vanishes, right? Yet for mankind, the literature is always true and it will always be great. So Tagore infers that if there can be a truth like the paper which gets involved in due process of time, not only moth, by destruction, by depreciation of time, whatever, it loses, the paper loses and loses its relation to humanity, then it would be void and passive and it would have no significance. Now, so this is almost, we have come to the end, and the morning sun is rising, although it is a little bit cloudy, so you can see that the light is, so that truth is not apart from the mind which is perceiving this morning sun, right? So because we have a mind, we can see the morning sun and the beautiful day around. So finally what Tagore says, that even there is a paper with the moth or any time which depreciates or moves it out, right? So even if it does so, but the literature to humanity will always be there. So if there is any truth which is apart and it loses its connection to humanity, it doesn't. As he concludes, truth that has no sensuous, that means with senses, or rational relation to the human mind, if it has got no rational relation to the human mind, it will ever remain as nothing so long as we remain human beings. That means we will remain as human beings, but anything which has got no sensuous or relational relation to the human being, it has got no existence. Now we come to the last two lines of our 2-episode conversation. Now you see what Einstein tells. Einstein, then I am more religious than you are. This is remarkable. Then I am more religious than you are. Now you think that why Einstein is telling. Now religion, is it something that is not related to belief, or something which is blind, something which comes just as a matter of belief and nothing else? It has got nothing else. Well, Einstein believes that I am more religious than you are. Why? Because I believe in something. I believe, as you see in just a few lines earlier, what Einstein tells, that the existence of truth apart from humanity cannot be explained or proved. But it is a belief which nobody can lie was present in primitive beings. We attribute truth to a superhuman objectivity, and it is indispensable. And the reality which is independent of our existence and our experience of our mind, though we cannot say what it means. Now this is the belief of Einstein, that he believes that he cannot say what it means, and hence he says that okay, so truth is in even if it is there which we cannot prove, that means I am more religious than you are. Now see how Tagore concludes the conversation. My religion is in the reconciliation of the superpersonal man, the universal human spirit in my own individual being. My religion is in the reconciliation of the superpersonal man, the universal human spirit in my individual being. So simple, clear, what Tagore tells, that his truth lies in the reconciliation of the superpersonal man, the individual mind, or the universal mind in my individual. I have been repeating that it is all within me. Eternal, perpetual process. There's a song called Shudhu Java Asha Shudhu Srote Bhasha. So this reconciliation, this perpetual way of being and becoming, of rising and falling, will continue, because we individuals have a limitation. But Tagore's religion lies in reconciliation of the superpersonal man, which Einstein thinks to be something different within me, within my mind. And that is true religion, and that Tagore has been lecturing in his Hibbert lectures in Oxford, which is called the religion of man. This particular line actually reminds me of the famous, Bohr-Einstein debate, which most of you know. I think it started around about 1927 in the Solvay Congress. We all saw those pictures of 29 great luminaries, including Marie Curie, 29 people out of the seven, most of them, I think more than 17 people either have won Nobel Prize or would be winning the Nobel Prize. Now, the Bohr-Einstein debate was that Einstein was basically believing on his principle of a world which is independent of the observer. A world which is independent of the observer. And Niels Bohr talked about the role of the observations which is made by the observer. So there are other things which relates to probability, etc. But you see, Einstein believed in the world which is independent of the observer, and Bohr did not. So it is something which is similar to, what we are doing here, that is Tagore. Now, just to conclude these final lines, what I would like to tell you is that, in this conversation, typically we understand that Tagore, being a mystic poet or I would say more of a scientist, I would say more of a believer in science, he talked about Atman, Brahman, typical Indian philosophy of the Vedas and the Upanishads. And Tagore and Einstein's, Platonic comment that the, what it is called, beauty lies in the eyes of the beholder. So it is true, was true to the individual, but truth being independent of human beings. And for Tagore, the relativistic approach towards reality occurred only when there is a gap between a difference between the individual and the universal mind. That is the relativistic approach for Tagore. And there is always a process, always a striving to overcome that. Now, it is not a question of right or wrong, as I was wrong. This entire 3 episode of my earnest effort to bring out to the entire world the Tagore Einstein conversation is that whatever Tagore is telling, it is his perspective. Whatever Einstein is telling, it is his perspective. As I told that at the end of this episode, you will see that Tagore, being a mystic poet or a person who believes in philosophy, art and literature, is more of a scientist and more scientific in his approach, I should say. More scientific is in his approach rather than Einstein being a man of science. So we conclude those lines, Einstein telling, so I am more religious than you are. And Tagore says that my religion lies in reconciliation of the superpersonal mind or the superpersonal person in the individual mind. So that is, I think, all. We have gone through the, quite a long episode. I have received feedback telling that why are you making so long? But I just thought that without those philosophical interpretations from Gita, Upanishad, Wittgenstein, etc., it is very difficult in order to analyze and let you know what actually it is. That's all. I think that I have explained this. One more important thing is that if you are really wondering that I have been reading lines and explaining. So where is the original, what are the original lines? Where is the original script? Don't worry, I have made a plan. Before the Christmas, I would be bringing down a video in which there will be just a narration of Einstein and Tagore. Nothing more. No explanation. So I will put across just the original lines as spoken by Tagore and Einstein. In case you really want to explore, you can just go through that and read that. So there will be an audio and there will be a visual. As I told, there has been a lot of controversies and a lot of problems in collecting those matter because some website books they tell of different things. So finally we depend on the religion of man, which Vishwa Bharati is more or less a kind of a, I would say what, authentic source. So lastly, I would like to end this series by telling one line from the Shiv Mahimna Stotram, and which actually encapsulates everything together. It says something like this: Ruchinang Vaichitrad Riju Kutila Nana Pathajusham. Okay. It says Ruchinang Vaichitrad Riju Kutila Nana Pathajusham Nirnam Eko Gamyas Tvamasi payasam aranava iva. Let me explain you. This is in Sanskrit. It says that ruchinam vaichitrad. Ruchi, that is human beings' taste, different moods, are vaichitra, that is different. Riju, that is it is straight. Kutil, that means it is crooked. Riju kutila nana pathajusham. That means it is riju, it is crooked and it is straight, and it takes nana pathajusham. It takes different path. Nirnam eko gamyas. Nir or nirnam means human being or humanity. Nirnam eko. Then human beings go is one. Nirnam eko gamyas. Gamya means gaman. It Sanskrit means to go. Nirnam eko gamyas tvamasi, towards you, payasam aranav iva. Aranav in Sanskrit actually means ocean. So in total, if you talk, it tells something like this. Just as the different rivers and their tributaries take different paths to reach the sea, similarly human beings use different tastes and methods to reach their destination, which leads to thee. So ruchinang vaichitra, that means there are different ways and different moods. Riju kutila nana pathajushang, either it is straight or crooked. Nirnam eko gamyas tvamasi. Human beings go only towards one path. Tvamasi payasam aranava iva. Just as different tributaries of the river goes towards Aranav or the sea. Similarly, although different tastes and moods exist, yet human beings go only towards one direction, that is towards thee. So the objective of telling these lines from Shiv Mahimna Sutram is just to tell you whatever Einstein tells, whatever reality exists, whatever Tagore tells, whatever the subsuming of the universe into the super personal being happens, each and every of us will lead to thee. Each and every one of us will go towards that. Either we take a different path, either we take a straight path or we take a crooked path. Our ultimate destination is mixing or going and reaching towards the ocean. Thank you very much for watching this episode. Have a nice day and stay safe and stay happy.